What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to rank the top 25 games of the year for me. Now, a few things to say in the beginning, just so we're all kind of clear on criteria and games that I did play or didn't play. Well, number one, I've actually played 36 games. I ranked all of them in a live stream I did a few days ago. So if you want to find the complete rankings, there's that. This is just the top 25, so if you notice a game is missing. Another thing to throw in is games that I want to still play. So games like RoboCop, Star Ocean Second Story R, Mario Wonder, and a few others I haven't even tried yet. I actually own Second Story R, but I just haven't played it. So those games are not on the list simply because I haven't played them. I think they would probably be pretty high on the list if I did. But then there's games like Lies of P, Armored Core, and a few others. These are games that I either played for like an hour and I just don't have an opinion on, or they're games that I just flat out haven't played, and I really don't have a plan to play them anytime soon, okay? Just so you're wondering about, like, missing games, right? And I can, of course, let you know in the comments if you want what games I have and haven't played. Okay, so final two things. Number one, in order to appear on this list, I had to have played at least enough to have formed an opinion. So a game like Baldurs Gate 3 is on here because I have formed an opinion, even though I didn't beat it, versus Lies of P, which I played like an hour, and I don't have an opinion on, right? So that's one. And number two, remakes are kind of purposely a little bit lower just because of the nature of remakes, but they're still on here. So remakes can qualify for my list, but they're not going to be, top three or anything like that, all right? So let's go through this. Number 25, Street Fighter 6. Now, you might say, oh my God, Alex, you're starting that low for Street Fighter. So the thing is, again, it's how I view this game, my impressions of it. I'm not a fighting guy, so that immediately, hurts this game. It's not the game's fault. I think on any rational person's list, this game would be higher, or somebody that can, I guess, appreciate it more. I think this game is beautiful. I think this game mechanically is awesome. It's a really fun fighting game, and I got into Street Fighter literally this year. I played 5, and then I bought 6 day one. I played it day one, and I enjoyed it. I'm terrible at it, and that's kind of just why it's where it's at, right? Like, I can't go much further with it. Just my skill level kind of caps me. I think it's an excellent game, but just for, did it make an impact on me? It did. It just can't be all that high. Number 24, I'm shouting out a game that I actually have shouted out before, but it's called The Wreck. If you watched my live stream last week, I kind of talked quite a bit about it. This is a very, very small indie game. Sold very, very low numbers, and I mean like a couple thousand people have experienced this game. That's how low it did. But this is an excellent game. Story is really, really good. The visuals and the gameplay style is very reminiscent of What Remains of Edith Finch, if you guys have played that game. So it deserves it. I think it's a lesser version of that game, but the story is excellent, and then it kind of makes up for the shortcomings of the rest of it. It's not the longest game of all time. It might make an impact on you story-wise. I guess it's possible that it also doesn't. It's a lot of pointing and clicking, and I know that style just doesn't work with some people. I totally get that, but that's basically what this game is. I love this game, and I think it deserves this spot. Number 23 is Mortal Kombat 1, another fighting game. I like this more just because I'm way more into Mortal Kombat story. I'm actually a fan of the newer age Mortal Kombat stories. Now I'll say this, I had huge problems with the ending of Mortal Kombat 1. I actually made a whole rant. It was one of the better videos that performed this year on my channel, just kind of talking about my gripes with the ending of the story of MK1. But I think most of the story is very good. Visually, again, this game, in a different way than Street Fighter, right? Kind of different art styles. This game is visually amazing, and I really like the combat. I would say I'm a better, and I'm still terrible, but I'm a better Mortal Kombat player and fighter than I am Street Fighter. So that's really it. That's kind of the reasons why it's higher than Street Fighter. I know a lot of people prefer Street Fighter or would put that higher. For me, it's Mortal Kombat, but that's just kind of my taste. Number 22, another kind of shocker, is Jasant, which is the rock climbing, don't nod game. Kind of a surprise for me. If you told me, and I think I even titled my review of this game, that this is Don't Nod's best game since the first Life is Strange, I agree with myself. I said it, so I still hold that, though, months later. I think this game is awesome visually. The sound, this game has really, really good music and just kind of moments of taking the world in, which is very Don't Nod. Don't Nod does that quite often. It reminded me of Life is Strange, but also, the core mechanic, literally climbing a wall. You would think, well, Alex, isn't that going to get old? Well, it's a 4 or so hour game, so it's not the longest game of all time. And they actually constantly introduce new things, whether it's the environment or new like kind of mechanics in general, that make rock climbing like a little different. So it is always evolving. Like you'd be maybe surprised it doesn't get old because they're constantly kind of adding stuff to it. So yeah, if you told me in the beginning of the year, I'd be shocked because this game is legitimately very good. Number 21, this is an interesting one. It's Oxenfree 2. The thing with Oxenfree 2 is it's not nearly as good as Oxenfree 1. In fact, in almost every way is a step back from Oxenfree 1. Now, here's the deal, though. Oxenfree 1 is one of the better games I think ever created. It is a masterpiece. It is one of the best kind of loops of, like, you know, ending the game and then starting it over. Some of the biggest twists, some of the most, like, eerie moments you'll ever experience in a game. It is tremendous. And I actually just played it this year. Like, I didn't play it when it first came out, which is shame on me. But Oxenfree 2 is not as good as that, but it's still pretty good. It still does most of the things really well, and it's just a step back from the first game. So although it's not better than the masterpiece that was the first one, it's still extremely good. And I think if you're a fan of Oxenfree 1, you would still like Oxenfree 2. Plus, this game has kind of aged well for me. I think it came out over the summer, maybe like July. It's been a while, but I still think back to it. Some of the bigger moments in this game are still big and still are like really, really clever. So those I constantly think back to, thus landing it, I guess, where it lands on my list. All right, number 20. Maybe this makes people mad. God, I hope not. Starfield. Starfield is number 20 for a couple simple reasons. This game got me without massively getting me. I overall like this game. And I would maybe use those kind of adjectives, right? I like Starfield. I don't love it. I think it's got some great moments. I think it's got some great, and I haven't beaten this. This is a game, much like I mentioned, you know, Baldurs Gate in the beginning. This is something I can form an opinion on, but I haven't formed, like, I guess my full on. Like, if I beat it, maybe the opinion would change a little bit, but I've played enough to at least be able to rank it and give my thoughts. I think it's visually pretty darn solid. Definitely one of the best, if not the best looking, you know, Bethesda games feel like in terms of the gameplay or combat or, you know, shooting. I think it's pretty darn good. And then I like some of the more like the centralized planets where everything's kind of happening, right? The character dialogue or some of the bigger quest lines. The game is good. Like I've always said that, like, this game is a good game. I don't know if it's better than a good game for me. So I think 20, again, I did 36, right? So it's low for this video, but it, you know, out of 36 games and all being 20, I would say that's pretty darn solid. 19 is Assassin's Creed Mirage. Not necessarily the same reasons as Starfield, but maybe, you know, this is a game that tries to replicate Assassin's Creed 1, and I think it does it about as well as you could want. Now, it does that while also, like, bringing over some of the weaknesses, you know, that Assassin's Creed 1 is a good game, but I don't know if certain things have aged all that well, and this game kind of, like, adopted them for some reason. But I like Basim. I like the world. The combat, I've just never been a fan of Origins on the combat style. And I mean, some people hate the combat of the original Assassin's Creed, right? So I get it that they're kind of two different tastes, but the combat's just not for me. I went through it. I played the main game. I played plenty of the side stuff. I think the game is overall extremely solid. I think it's got some great moments. I think it's got some great characters, and I think it's overall a really good game. Okay, number 18. This could be controversial. We'll see. Diablo 4. So the reason I put this, and I would say high, right, out of 36, this is actually, you know, the midpoint here. Diablo 4, I think structurally, like the game itself, is very good. It got me. You know, it's got a great gameplay loop, as we know. You know what I mean? Diablo 3, I got into it when I think I was like ending high school, beginning of college, and I remember just sitting, listening to music, listening to Smashing Pumpkins on my laptop on the floor in my room, and just grinding Diablo 3, and I loved it. I think the repetitive, but it's always kind of, it's changing a little bit, right? They're always giving you a little with the gameplay, is like, it's addicting. It's a very addictive style of gameplay. So I think 4 does the same thing. Now, the reason I would put it lower, and this is the controversial part, I kind of want to penalize it. I think a lot of the practices that Diablo 4 has been atrocious. The horse armor, you know, charging $60, $70. The battle pass controversy back at the beginning, right, where if you press the button and you get locked in, you just get the battle pass when maybe you wanted to wait, or whatever it is, season pass, whatever, when you wanted to wait for the next one, but they almost force you into getting, you know, the one that's happening right now. Those kind of practices, I think, are really, especially the horse armor, the $60, $70 microtransactions for this game. Give me a break, right? So for me, the game itself is excellent, and I really enjoy it. And I think it's highly addicting and really, really fun. And I don't play it religiously. That's another, like, you could say, well, Alex, do you play it like this or that? I don't play it religiously. I play it, just as kind of a relaxing, I kind of turn off my brain, right? Just kind of like sink some hours in. That's the game for me, and I get that that's not what it is for other people. So it would probably honestly be higher if it wasn't for the outside stuff that happened with this game. But I think it deserves this spot. Plus, ultimately, I do think I enjoyed the games higher than it. I think to those games more than I think of Diablo 4. So number 17 is Ghost Runner 2. Now, to make this kind of short and easy, it's almost the exact same thing as Oxenfree 2. It's not as good as the first game, but it's still trying to match up to an excellent game. The first Ghost Runner game is awesome. It is really, really fun, and it's extremely difficult, and it's highly rewarding, all that jazz. 2, there are some things, now, unlike Oxenfree, I'd say the story is about equal from Ghost Runner 2 to 1, and then I'd say the characters and world building are much better in Ghost Runner 2 than they are in the first game. So I would definitely give it that. Everything else is worse. It is much easier, and I think that's a weakness because it just wasn't nearly as challenging. The combat, like the gameplay, is extremely good, but, you've already really done it for Ghost Runner 1, right? So maybe equal, maybe a slight step back in that regard. Again, it's still an excellent game, but it's following like this masterpiece, so it's not going to be as good. Again, very, very much like Oxenfree. Number 16, this was kind of a shocker, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is, Dead by Daylight will always be important to me. It's probably still my favorite of this genre, of games. But Texas Chainsaw, I think, absolutely nailed it. Now, granted, I haven't played in a few months, so I haven't played this game nearly as much as Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight, I've probably sunk hundreds of, I'm sure my PlayStation can tell me, hundreds of hours. Texas Chainsaw, not nearly as much, but I think for, being limited to one, thing, which is what they are, I think they did such a good job. Visually, this is the best looking game by miles of any of these type of games. The gameplay itself, like the difference between the victims and making the victims truly unique, the difference between the family members, like they nailed it. The tone, the atmosphere, like you feel claustrophobic, you feel scared when you're in that basement with Leatherface. Like I really think they nailed it. And there's always a possibility they nailed it, but there's also a big possibility they would completely fail. So shocker, I guess, in that way. They pulled it off, and I think this game is really, really good. Number 15, honestly, much the same in terms of shocker, Crash Team Rumble. And I actually named this game, I think, the most surprising game of the year. So, again, short and sweet for Crash. I get that we don't need this game. I'm on your side if you say, well, Alex, I boycotted this game because we don't need these kind of games for a Crash game. I agree with you. And if you follow my arc with this game, my arc has been almost as interesting as the game's arc. I was dismissive of it. I was pretty angry by it. I was always like, okay, well, I'm still going to play it. I'm still going to give it a chance. But I was always very, pessimistic, right? Game comes out, and it freaking crushes it. To me. Now, people didn't buy it, from what I can understand. People are not really playing it. The game was populated by bots the first day it came out, and it stayed that way since that happened. I don't think the game did all that well. Regardless, the game is so much fun. The game actually works, and the game actually does it. And I can tell you, from me, and you can, again, watch my arc throughout the whole year, nobody was more surprised than me. Because it's just like I didn't think, or I was at least very questioning of if this thing could work, and it absolutely does. So I get it. We don't need this kind of game. I want, a single-player Crash. I want a single-player Spyro, but it is actually unbelievable that they pulled this off. Number 14, you know what? This is the stretch of surprises. Number 14, Dead Island 2. Dead Island 2 is really, really good. And in fact, I'll go even more controversial. Dead Island 2 is my favorite of any of these type of games. So Dead Island 1, Dead Island Riptide, Dying Light, and I will say Dying Light is better than the other Dead Islands, but Dying Light and Dying Light 2, I actually think Dead Island 2 is the better of all of those games. Visually, it impressed the heck out of me, especially from where Dead Island was. The combat, I think it's what we've kind of seen before, but I think it did exactly what it needed to do. The characters, the story, the side quests. We'll talk a little bit about side quests as we go for other games. Sometimes side quests can kind of sink a game. Not this game. Dead Island 2 is consistently really good. There are some awesome side quests in this game. There's an awesome main quest in this game. Like I said, the characters in this game are really, really good. I said Crash was my most, surprising. Dead Island might be number 2 or number 3. I can't believe how good this game was. And I am not a fan of the first Dead Islands. Like Dead Island 1 was one of the most disappointing games of my entire life. So to go from that to this is incredible. So I definitely think it deserved this spot. Number 13, Hogwarts Legacy. This one could be controversial, I guess, depending on where you're coming at it. I think this is a good spot for it, and I'll tell you why. In terms of the world, Hogwarts, like the literal castle, I think they crushed it. The combat, I said this combat is actually my favorite combat of the entire year. It's the free flow combat, basically, of the Arkham games pioneering it almost, right? It's that, but with wands and magic. And I think they do it just as good as you think it can be done. So those are the two big strengths. Now there are other strengths, right? There are some good characters, Sebastian, right? There's some good quest lines. It's a game of a couple of elite things, then some good things, and then everything else is average. And I think that's fair. And I think that's why it's 13. It's not why it's 5 or 4, right? There are so many things in this game that are average that are kind of helped by it being in the Wizarding world. The amount of Merlin trials in this game are unbelievable. The amount of those kind of things, right? Just kind of populating the world just to do it. We don't need that. I think gamers have moved beyond that point. I think we're smarter than that than we were, 20 years ago. And I think that's got to stop. Specifically how many they did. Some of it was fun, like the collecting the field guide pages and stuff. Some of those were actually really good, but just the amount of them felt like they were trying to almost overcompensate. They didn't need to do that. But overall, a game I think back to and I still really like. Again, it's elite things. It has some good stuff, and then it's got some average stuff. Number 12 is Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. This game, it's tough, and it's actually quite high, on my list. It is driven primarily from two different things. Number one, the return of Kiryu, okay? That can help any game. Just putting Kiryu in your game would help it. Number two, the ending of this game. The ending of this game is one of, if not the best moment in a game this year. It got me, not crying, but very, very close. And very few games can do that to me, but this game did it. It is incredible, okay, with a capital I. And then the rest of it, well, it's another Yakuza game, right? It's got its moments. It's got some funny side stuff. It's stuff you've absolutely seen before. The story is not nearly as good as some of the better stories in the franchise. So, again, maybe like Hogwarts, it's held up by some incredible moments, and in this way, I think it's just slightly better than Hogwarts. And then the rest of it is what you kind of expect from one of these games, from Like a Dragon. And I don't think that's bad, but that's just literally what it is. Number 11 is Resident Evil 4's remake. Now, remember what I said in the beginning of the video? I'm holding the remake almost against it to try to be fair, right? So these are the new games that released this year. It's a new game. It definitely is. I consider remakes new games, but it's also based off a game that already exists, right? So I'm going to hold it back a little bit. Resident Evil 4 is a tremendous game. There's actually almost nothing, and I can't think of anything, so there's no negative that I can think of with this game. Visually, insanely good, and that's, more of the remake part to it. The combat, the story, the characters, the atmosphere, the different locations you go to. It is awesome, The only thing you could say, I don't know how people are going to view this, I guess, right? Why isn't it higher? It's a remake. And I'll throw this in. And I haven't been as high on RE4 as other people. Like, I think it is still one of the better games ever created, all that Pioneer, that kind of stuff. But I just don't hold it as highly as other people do. So that brings it down just a little bit. Okay, top 10. Number 10 is Master Detective Archives Raincode, a game that I just beat like a week ago. This game came out back in June. Very Danganronpa-like, in fact, very much inspired from the same guy who created Danganronpa. And it's not as good. I was going to say it's just as good. It's not. It's definitely a step back from at least the first two Danganronpa games. But again, much like Oxenfree and Ghost Runner, Danganronpa is one of my favorite experiences, games, etc. that I've ever, lived through. So this game, I think, does a really good job. It's got some great characters. It does have some twists. Primarily towards the end, it is pretty predictable up until that point, but it is an all-around really great game, and I wanted to beat it so I could put it in this ranking, and that's why, just in the last week I've beaten this game, and I'm glad I did, because, it's a top 10 game for me. Number 9 is Persona 5 Tactica. This is a slow burn. The things that stand out immediately is the gameplay. The gameplay, I think, worked from the first, minute that you're playing it. I think the tactical kind of idea really does work with literal personas, right, and their abilities. I think the gameplay works. The story takes a bit, and it's not really focused on the Phantom Thieves, which I know kind of like diehard fans had, and I get it. I absolutely get it, but people did have problems with that. story, I do think gets better as it goes. And towards the end, it becomes, I think, a legitimate, like, it takes a while to become a Persona quality story. And it probably takes longer than other Persona games do. But once it gets there, it's really good. And again, that's why it's kind of this high on my list at number 9. Number 8 is Final Fantasy 16. This is maybe the best example of the best of it propping it up and the worst of it bringing it down. I want it, like, I was debating, right, where to put this, and at its best, this is probably a top 3 to 5 game of the year. The characters, the story when it's going, the combat, including like the boss fights that are just unbelievably good, right, and constantly are topping themselves, that makes this game a top 3 to 5 game of the year. But the weakest parts, the side quests in this game are atrocious. Not all, but probably 90% of them are some of the worst. They are the things that we've been criticizing with side quests for decades, right? So that really, to me, I don't want to make it more negative because it's number 8, right? It's pretty high. But if you're wondering, well, why isn't it higher? The negatives really drag it back because at its best, this game is spectacular. And I still think of some of the story beats. I still think of some of the boss fights, some of the characters. It's incredible. It just gets held back from some of the side stuff. Number 7 is Marvel Spider-Man 2. Here's another maybe controversial one. I think it deserves this spot. It's in the top 10. It's higher up. But it being rushed towards the end holds it back. It's got memorable moments, but maybe not as many as other games in the same kind of area, right? Making an impact. At the same time, this game does improve so many elements from the first game. You know, I constantly said it when the game released. I don't know if I can play the first game again. It might have a better story, the first game, but the traversal, like swinging, the physics of swinging, the city itself, right? Just how it uses the PS5, and also the combat. I don't know if you can go backwards, right? Because it literally is just so much better in the second game. I don't know if I could go back to play the first one. So, you know, again, at its best, it improves massively on the first game. And I think you can make the argument that it maybe is a better game. I know some people do like it more than the first game, but, you know, the story, the characters I do think actually are really awesome. Kraven is an awesome villain. But, you know, there are some things primarily with the story, with like the second half, let's say, that hold this game back a bit. Okay, number 6 is Sea of Stars, another one that I was really hoping that I could play before the end of the year, and I did. This is a game that I kind of lived through what was happening with it, but I wasn't really in it, right? Like, the game surprised me in the sense that it came out and I never heard of it. And it was getting Game of the Year, you know, nominations, and people were talking about it, and people told me to play it. And I was like, oh, okay, this is catching me off guard. Now, by the time I played this game, I had already heard all those great things. So in one way, it surprised me, and then in another way, it didn't, right? Because I heard that it was so good. But the story is excellent. The characters, the dialogue, even though none of it's spoken, you're just reading, is excellent. The combat, the sound, the music in this game is one of my favorite sounds, let's say, of any game in the entire year. It is a spectacular game. There's a few things. The ending was a little weird to me. It felt like it should have been a little darker. They never really took that step to being like extra dark, even though I think they could have. There's a few things, but ultimately, this is one of the better games of the year. I'm very happy I gave it the chance that it absolutely deserved. And I think even though I went in expecting so freaking much, right, because everybody told me, I think it lived up to it. And those are tough expectations, right? So I think it did it. Number 5 is the Dead Space remake. Now, okay, call me the hypocrite, right? Because here you go. Here's a remake in the top 5. But it's not in the top 3 or top 4, top 5. So Dead Space is what Resident Evil 4 is to other people, right? I mentioned how I feel of Resident Evil 4. Dead Space is that. Dead Space 1 and 2, both of them equally almost, are some of the best horror games, and not even just horror, some of the best games ever created, right? So that's how I view it. So Dead Space remake, to me, is like the Resident Evil 4 remake to others. It deserves Game of the Year contender because I think they did it about as perfectly. Both of these remakes are what you want remakes to be, right? They maybe even add some stuff. They change some stuff, but they don't hurt the core of the game, and in fact they bring it to the modern audience, the person that doesn't want to go back to the GameCube or whatever Dead Space for last generation, past generations. You don't do that, right? And they did it so well. So I love the characters, I love the twist, I love the atmosphere, I love the Ishimura, all that stuff. So I think they nailed it. Number 4 is Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I think this is a good spot. It's maybe like the safest game, in the top 10, where I think back to it it just so fondly, but it doesn't stand out enough, I guess, to get to the top 3, let's say, right? But it's got some incredible moments. It's got some great writing. This is the Star Wars game that, like, we've wanted, at least to me. I know it had performance issues. Now, I didn't really experience much. I did experience a little, but not to the extent that other people did. So it never ruined it for me. But everything else, like the characters, Cal, like I said, the writing, the combat is just so underratedly good. The combat's just so excellent from start to finish, and adding more stances and it's still being good. The boss fights, like, it is an incredible game, and it's almost shocking that we even got it, right? Because I think so many people kind of just forget about it or maybe diminish it a little because, and again, I get it. I get the performance stuff hurt it, but I think this is a top tier game that we got this year. Number 3 is Baldurs Gate 3. Now, this goes back to what I said in the beginning of the video. I needed to have an opinion, but I've only played about 10-12 hours of Baldur's Gate 3. So, again, you can call me whatever you want. I can form an opinion on it, but I can't form my entire. And I guess what I think about when I say that is I think this could probably be my game of the year if I played it all the way through. I don't know when that's going to happen. I've only, again, played like 10 or so hours, but what I experienced is a masterpiece. Character, writing, the amount of variations that something could have. Like, this is the ultimate kind of role-playing game to me, and that's only playing, maybe a tenth of it. So I think this game deserves it. Again, I'm not going to put it any higher than 3 just because, I haven't played it all the way through, but I think it deserves to be very, very high. Top 2. Well, I already did a video on my number 1, so we can do these back to back. HiFi Rush is number 2, and Alan Wake 2 is number 1. HiFi Rush is a game I think people hopefully don't forget about, but because it doesn't deserve that. But it's such a good game. Characters, story, those are maybe the 2 most surprising things, right? Because you see it and you say the art style stands out and the gameplay stands out with the, matching the beat. But the game itself is awesome. It's one of the better stories of the year. It's one of the better casts of characters of the year. And it's one of the biggest surprises of the year that they shadow dropped it, right? This was my game of the year the entire year, from January through Jedi Survivor, through Baldur's Gate, through Spider-Man, all of those. This was the game. And then Alan Wake 2 beat it. But HiFi Rush definitely deserves everything nice, ever said about it. And then number 1, Alan Wake 2. I won't spend too much time. We did a whole video, talking about why Alan Wake 2 is my game of the year. I'll say this to condense it as much as possible. It did everything I wanted and then more. And that's really what did it for me, because my expectations for this game were higher than any other game this entire year. And I thought they would maybe dumb it down a little bit, right? Because it's so convoluted, it's so strange. I want that. I like that about Kingdom Hearts, right? I really enjoy that. They not only did that, but they did it more. And they made it even more crazy and convoluted. So what I wanted from it, they gave me exactly that, and then they gave me a little extra. They gave me like a dessert on the side, right? And I didn't know if we'd get that or not. So that in a condensed way is why Alan Wake is my game of the year. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.